It marches us into an abyss. He was right. Mr. Speaker, today I join a statement of 31 foreign ministers as signatories with a simple, urgent message: the war in Gaza must end now. There is no military solution. Negotiations will secure the hostages. Further bloodshed serves no purpose. Hamas and Israel must both commit to a ceasefire now, and the next ceasefire must be the last ceasefire. I thank the United States, Qatar and Egypt for their tireless efforts, and I'm sure all members share my intense frustration that it has not happened. Until there is a breakthrough, we must keep doing all we can to relieve the suffering. UK aid has saved lives, reaching hundreds of thousands with food, water, hygiene and sanitation, and essential health care. And under the most appalling circumstances, our aid is saving lives today. That includes the almost £9 million the UK has provided to UK Med since we entered office, reaching 500,000 patients inside Gaza, 24,000 in the past fortnight alone. Like 3-year-old Razan, UK-funded medics removed a bullet from her neck after nearly 3 hours of surgery. These doctors and nurses working in the most extreme conditions are true heroes. They deserve the thanks and the admiration of the entire House. We're also working, of course, multilaterally. The 149 trucks from the World Food Programme and UNICEF entering Gaza in recent days included food supplies funded by the United Kingdom, and 1,000 more trucks laden with aid paid for by British taxpayers can enter the moment the Israeli government lets them in. Today, I'm announcing an extra £40 million worth for humanitarian assistance in Gaza this year, including £7.5 million for UK Med to sustain their vital operations in Gaza and save more lives. Mr. Deputy Speaker, accompanying the horrors in Gaza, there is an accelerating campaign to prevent a further Palestinian state in the West Bank. It's embraced by Netanyahu. It's encouraged by his ministers. It's driven by an extremist ideology which wants to suffocate the two-state solution, the only route to a lasting peace and security. We see it in the unprecedented pace of settlement expansion, in the shocking levels of settler violence, even settler terrorism. For that is what the most egregious ideological attacks are, and it is the deliberate attempts to squeeze the Palestinian Authority, unjustly denying it access to its own funds, and it harms Israel's long-term interests in the process. Now the Israeli government is reintroducing plans to construct new units in the E1 area of occupied East Jerusalem. If built, this settlement would separate the West Bank north from its south, and Palestinians in the West Bank from East Jerusalem. These plans are wholly unacceptable, they are illegal, and they must not happen. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are striving to keep open the prospects of a two-state solution. UK assistance has been preserving the Palestinian Authority, contributing to essential Palestinian workers' salaries and supporting them to progress critical reforms. Today I can confirm we are enhancing our support, providing £7 million to strengthen the Palestinian Authority and Palestinian governance, implementing the agreement signed by myself and PM Mustafa earlier this year, and we're delivering the reform plans that President Abbas has set out. I can also confirm that we're providing £20 million worth to support UNRWA's many services for Palestinian refugees. And alongside this support, we are leading diplomatic efforts to show that there must be a viable pathway to a Palestinian state involving the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, in the security and governance of the area. Hamas can have no role in the governance of Gaza, nor use it as a launchpad for terrorism. Israeli ministers should support the Palestinian Authority, not actively undermine its economy, as Ministers Ben-Gvir and Smodrich are doing. The UK is co-leading with Egypt the humanitarian and reconstruction track for the forthcoming two-state solution conference, and we are pushing to agree plans for a credible next phase in Gaza with a responsible reform PA at their core. So we turn any temporary ceasefire into a lasting peace. Mr Deputy Speaker, in our year in office, this Labour government has acted to address this horrendous conflict. We've restored funding to UNRWA after the Tories froze it. We suspended arms export licences when the Tories declined to act. We've provided nearly $250 million in humanitarian assistance this year and next, getting medical treatment and food to hundreds of thousands of civilians in Gaza. We stood with the hostage families at every stage. We've worked with Jordan to fly medicines into Gaza, with Egypt to treat medically evacuated civilians, with Kuwait and UNICEF to help children in Gaza. We've delivered 3 sanctions packages on violent settlers, suspended trade negotiations with the Israeli government, and sanctioned far-right Israeli ministers for incitement. We've defended the independence of the international courts. We've signed a landmark agreement with the Palestinian Authority and hosted the Palestinian Prime Minister in London, pushing for the reform it needs. We called for, worked for, voted for an immediate ceasefire and the release of the hostages at every possible opportunity, and we will keep doing so until this war is over. Hamas releases the hostages and we finally have a pathway to a two-state solution. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Priti Patel.
Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement. The violence, loss of life and conflicts that continue in the Middle East shock us all. The events in the Middle East have a direct impact upon our national interests and to people living in our own country, from the concerns about family members in the regions to demonstrations on our street, and from the threats from Iran to the rise of anti-Semitism. This side of the House is clear that we want to see an end of the conflict in Gaza, a return of the hostages. Humanitarian support, which is so desperately needed, must get in, and an end to the terror inflicted by Hamas and Iran. But the reality of peace and a sustainable end to the conflict in Gaza seems to be drifting further away. What is Britain's role when it comes to workable outcomes and practical solutions to advance an end to this conflict? And what diplomatic action is being taken with regional allies and the US? Where is Britain's voice and action when it comes to putting new pressure on Hamas to agree the most recent US proposals to secure a ceasefire and release the hostages who've been in cruel captivity for more than 650 days? On the statement the Foreign Secretary signed earlier today, can he confirm or explain what an unconditional and permanent ceasefire means for Hamas and the Palestinian Authority? Last week I met with Keith and Ava Siegel, hearing their harrowing experience of being held in brutal captivity by Hamas. I paid tribute to their incredible bravery and their resilience and dedication to securing the freedom of the remaining hostages, from Gail to Ziv Berman to Matan Angras and Omi Moran, and all those being held in barbaric captivity. They must be returned to their loved ones. The hostages are denied humanitarian access by Hamas. What is the government doing about this? And when was his last intervention on this particular issue? On aid to Gaza, this situation has deteriorated beyond all rational comprehension. The daily reports of casualties seeking aid are appalling, and we utterly condemn these attacks. But our words and political statements of condemnation are not saving lives. So what practical solutions, proposals and options has the Foreign Secretary and the British government discussed with Israel on aid supplies into Gaza? What dialogue is there to find an agreement on getting aid supplies and access open that goes beyond the current dangerous approach that has been adopted? I remind the House that the last Conservative government, through Lord Cameron, secured new aid routes and better aid access to save lives. Surely, in light of the desperate urgency of the situation we all see, calls for such options have to be considered once again. On settlement, I reiterate our long-standing position that these are not helpful to achieving long-term peace. Israel should not take steps that could make a two-state solution more difficult, and it must use its legal system to clamp down on settler violence. We want a two-state solution that guarantees security and stability for both Israeli and Palestinians, and Palestinians, and I'm sure that he agrees it should only come at a time that is conducive to peace, and that it cannot be at the start of a process, and certainly not while Israeli hostages are still in captivity in Gaza. And does the Foreign Secretary agree that there needs to be a clear plan and international measures to see the exit of Hamas from Gaza? On Syria, the barbaric violence we have witnessed in recent days cannot continue. All groups and minorities in Syria must be protected, and the Foreign Secretary has mentioned his recent discussions with the transitional Syrian
We're going
leadership.
to leave the House of Commons there, and just to reiterate a couple of points that we heard there from the Foreign Secretary. He condemned the killing of civilians in Gaza. He said there were daily reports of Israeli troops opening fire on people waiting to access food. He also talked about the Israeli government having to answer what possible military justification there can be for the strikes that, in his words, killed desperate, starving children. He also talked about how Israel's offensive puts hostages who are held in Gaza, Israeli hostages, in grave danger. Well, let's just get a little bit of context now. Let's speak to a couple of guests who I have down the line. Dr. Julie Norman is Associate Professor in Politics and International Relations at the University College London, and Rachel Cummings is the team leader for the Save the Children charity in Gaza. Julie, to you first of all, let me ask you for your reaction to what you've heard today. We've had that statement from the 24 nations plus the UK. We've had the Foreign Secretary not mincing his words in the House of Commons today, a very forceful statement towards Israel and Israeli actions. What do you think these nations are hoping to achieve with this statement and with these words today?
Thanks, Mariam. I would say exactly that. This was a very direct statement, very forceful. As far as statements go, it was very strongly worded, very clearly saying this war must end. Very critical of the current humanitarian aid devastation, largely driven by the GHF, the U.S. and Israeli-led operation there right now, and very much calling for an end to the conflict more broadly, highlighting issues around settlements, around what's going on in the West Bank. And Lemmy's statements just now in the House of Commons, very forcefully reiterating that. With all that said, it's good as a statement goes. I think now what people here in the region are looking at is what comes after this. Is this the culmination? Is this statement the end? Or is this the beginning of actually some actions to back up these words that will actually result in some kind of change in policy and change on the ground?
And that, I guess, is the big question. What do you think?
Well, I think there's some different options. I mean, we do know that France, at least, is leaning towards recognition of a Palestinian state. Some of the wording in the statement, some of which imply that if things do not change, that France and other states might pursue that. Lammy, I think, iterated some of the steps that the UK is taking. But at the end of the day, I think most of the states that sign on to this are aware that their leverage is still somewhat limited. The US obviously is not part of this statement, very much backs Israel. Israel has already rejected this statement. So in terms of real changes, I think they're realistic about the impact of these words, but at the same time felt it was better than silence and needed to be said nonetheless. And we'll see where they take it from here.
OK, Dr. Julie Norman, good to talk to you. Thank you. Let's cross now and speak to Rachel Cummings, team leader for Save the Children charity in Gaza. And I believe, Rachel, you are in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. Am I correct?
Yes,
what's the situation like there?
The situation is desperate in Gaza for children and their families. Yesterday morning there was evacuation notices issued to southwest Deir al-Balah, about 3 kilometres from where we are here, and that impacted between 50 and 80,000 people who are now having to make a very difficult decision to relocate, to be displaced into Gaza, where there is no land, there is no space, and nowhere is safe. So the situation is very, very challenging here.
And what about the situation in terms of aid and food? We've heard today from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, backed by Israel and the US. They blame the UN. Are they right to do so?
I haven't heard that reference to the UN, but the situation for children in Gaza and the access of civilians to food is absolutely desperate. There is no food in the markets the last 3 days. The markets have been empty. I was in Deir al-Balah yesterday, and the markets are empty. My team are sharing with me they have cash in their pockets, but there is no food to buy, and their children are crying all day, all night for hunger. The situation is terrible. We're seeing increased number of children in our clinics who are malnourished. Of course we are. We're seeing an increase in the number of pregnant women and breastfeeding women who are malnourished. It's very, very concerning.
What's the answer?
The answer is a definitive ceasefire for Gaza. We need peace. We need humanitarian supplies to enter Gaza at scale. We need access to children and their families, populations in the most desperate of situations. And I need to be able to provide a degree of safety and security for my teams, to be able to move around Gaza, to be able to provide life-saving essential services and supplies to children here.
Rachel Cummings from Save the Children, thank you very much for joining us from Gaza. Around the world and across the UK, this is The World Today on BBC News. Let's go back now to our top story, and the UK and 24 other nations condemning the horrifying killing of hundreds of Gazans trying to get food from Israel's aid operations. That statement released earlier today. We also heard from the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy in the House of Commons reiterating his criticism of the way in which aid is distributed in Gaza and the expansion of those Israeli settlements in and around East Jerusalem. Well, let's cross the desk to our chief international correspondent. I'm so used to saying cross live to Lise Doucette somewhere far away. I'm not used to you being in the studio, Lise, but just give me a little bit of an understanding of why you think these nations have signed this statement today.
Well, it's not the first time they've issued a strongly worded statement, but this one is unusual in that there are these 26 countries, including the United Kingdom, and the kind of language that they are using now, again doubling down on their call, which they've made many times before, that the ceasefire, there has to be a ceasefire, the hostages have to come home, the war has to end. Now they really are spelling it out, that the suffering of Gazans has reached new depths. They were directly critical of this new Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, trying to puncture any idea that this could in any way be an alternative to the UN system, the other aid agencies who had been operating when they could, when Israel allowed the eased up on the restrictions. But of course, not surprisingly, it was immediately rejected by Israel, as they have rejected every statement, basically saying you are playing into Hamas's hands. But I think the question now, Miriam, is why now, 20 months into the war, has Israel decided to expand its operations going into Deir al-Balah, the central belt of the Gaza Strip, whereas you've been hearing from the aid agencies, it has become a place of, let us say, relative safety. It is a humanitarian hub. The water system is working there, the desalination plant, the warehouses. The fear is, and you've heard it just expressed on your program, is Israel going after that? Or does Israel have a military target it wants to go after? Many questions are being asked, but the only force, the only voice that Israel seems to want to listen to is President Trump. And there are reports, even though we've heard them so many times before, that a ceasefire is close, achingly close, that President Trump is putting pressure on Israel to accept, pressure on Hamas. And just before we came on air, there is a report. Israel has accepted most of the Hamas's conditions. Hamas has accepted most of Israel. And President Trump is actually weighing in as well. So Israel trying to maximize this last moment. We'll have to wait and see how long this operation lasts and if indeed a ceasefire does take place.
Israel really takes what America says seriously, given
it does
what we saw over Iran, over those attacks from Israel?
Well, something happened. President Trump seemed to have been dazzled by what he said was the success of the attack. So Prime Minister Netanyahu does have a way. You know, he's the Trump whisperer of all Trump whisperers. But you'll remember, Mariam, at the end of the 12-day war, when he says you have to stop, he actually said to Israel, send those bombers back. Don't drop those bombs. Stop attacking. So he can exercise force. And I think Prime Minister Netanyahu does want to keep President Trump on side because he's only beginning. Because what happens after the ceasefire? What will be the future of Gaza? Who will run? This is where he does need President Trump. And Mariam, if you look right across the spectrum, it's not just the European and other countries who are now making strongly worded statements. Today, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Chief's Army Chief, said, we can't continue this war. I don't have enough reservists. I have to pull them out. Reservists themselves, a growing number, are saying, we're not going to serve anymore. There's been issues of suicide being committed by soldiers. The hostage families are doubling down on their anger and anguish. The chorus of criticism inside Israel from former spy chiefs, former prime ministers, is asking why is this war going on? Prime Minister Netanyahu has not been listening to them, not yet. But is this a sense that the end is near? Gazans will certainly want to believe it is.
And a ceasefire is what it is. It's a ceasefire, but it's not an end to hostilities or an end to the war. Where is that going to come from?
Where and how the war will end, the so-called day after. You'll remember, Mariam, even after the terrible events of October the 7th, the US tried to put that on the Israel agenda, and Prime Minister Netanyahu always resisted. Even his army chief said, we have to know where this leads. Why are we fighting? How will this end? And it was only when President Trump came up with his idea of a Riviera, a Gazan Riviera on the Mediterranean, that Gazans should voluntarily choose to leave, did Prime Minister Netanyahu latch onto it. And there are those in his cabinet, right-wingers, who keep saying, you have to keep expanding this war, you have to push Gazans. They call it a humanitarian city, Rafah, which is a misnomer of misnomers. Are they trying to accelerate this process to make it even more unlivable in all parts of Gaza so that Gazans eventually will say, enough, enough? Because we do know that President Trump has been trying to convince African countries, Middle Eastern countries to take in Palestinians from Gaza. So even if there is, what they're talking about is a 60-day ceasefire, the return of hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, the really big issue is then, what next?
Indeed. Lise, thank you very much for that. You're watching The World Today on BBC News. Stay with us. We're back after this short break. This is The World Today on BBC News. The latest headlines. Israel rejects a joint call from 25 Western powers to end the Gaza war and overhaul aid distribution. Britain's Foreign Secretary gave this message to Parliament in the last hour.
Today, I join a statement of 31 foreign ministers as signatories with a simple, urgent message: the war in Gaza must end now.
It comes as Israel attacks one of the few areas in the territory left unscathed, sparking new fears of a humanitarian disaster. Here, police are investigating after England defender Jess Carter reported being targeted with racist abuse online during the UEFA Women's Euros in Switzerland. And be prepared for new badges. Girl Guiding adds new challenges for girls lucky enough to be part of the pack. In Syria, a level of calm has returned to the city of Sueda after a week of brutal clashes between Druze fighters and Bedouin gunmen. Local media say hundreds of Bedouin have been evacuated from the city as part of the ceasefire agreement. But it's a fragile peace. More than 1,100 people were killed in the fighting in recent weeks, with bitter recriminations on all sides. Well, now Syrian government forces are in place around the city to restore order. But the Bedouin tribes are threatening to resume their offensive unless the hostages and their injured are returned. Well, let's cross live now and speak to Neil Quilliam, who is Associate Fellow at Chatham House. Neil, good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us. And, do you believe this ceasefire can hold?
I mean, it's going to be a short-term ceasefire. The tensions in the area between the Bedouin and the various Druze militias is so rife that it's hard to see it holding unless the central government intervenes, and I don't mean that militarily, but I mean sort of puts in place some reconciliation programs, tries to build on the de-escalation, but that's going to require some tact, some investment of time and energy. So I'm doubtful that this current ceasefire is going to hold.
And the tact, the time and energy, will that be helped by more involvement from the international community, do you think, from Europe, the US, Gulf states? Absolutely.
I mean, all of those actors, have a lot vested in the al-Sharaa government and really wants it to succeed. So they are really pushing hard, and we can see how much the US is intervening and mediating in this space. And they will be encouraging him and the interim government, to put in place steps to reconcile these tensions, not just in the south, but certainly on the coastal areas. And of course, there's still the big issue that needs to be sort of addressed. I mean, there have been several attempts at that, and that's sort of reconciling, the Kurdish, the SDF in the Kurdish region in the northeast with the central Damascus authorities.
And what of Israel? Of course, we saw Israel attacking certain parts of Damascus, saying it's supporting the Druze minority. Have Israel helped, do you think?
No, not at all. I mean, Israel has really sort of played in and played up tensions in the region. They are clearly trying to create a buffer, and they've made very clear that they want to demilitarize the south, and that's Sueda, Dera, and Quneitra. And they have sent a very strong message to al-Sharaa that this is a non-negotiable for them. We've seen the US step in and mediate, but I don't see Israel's intervention in Syria is helping at all. In fact, it's undermining the sort of national project.
OK, Neil, good to talk to you. Thank you very much, Neil Quilliam, there from Chatham House. Let's go to Japan now, where elections on Sunday resulted in the ruling coalition losing its majority in the country's upper house and a once fringe right-wing opposition party walking away with 14 new seats. The Prime Minister, Shigeru Ishiba, has said he has no plans to quit, despite the results reflecting frustration at the coalition of the Liberal Democratic Party over rising prices and the threat of US tariffs. And it's the small right-wing party, Sanseito, that's made the biggest gains. It's built its platform on a nationalist Japanese-first agenda, with its rise in popularity reflecting growing unease over immigration and over tourism. Its leader, Sohei Kamiyaha, has said he draws inspiration from Donald Trump's bold political style. Well, let's speak to Professor Christy Govella, Associate Professor of Japanese Politics and International Relations at the University of Oxford. Professor, it's good to talk to you. Thanks thanks for joining us. What is happening in Japan right now in the world of politics?
Well, as you just mentioned, the ruling party and its coalition partner have suffered a pretty major defeat in this upper house election. And the election was overwhelmingly dominated by domestic economic issues in particular. So it really reflects a sense among Japanese people that there are problems that need to be solved that the current government is not addressing and that they want some change.
What kind of change are they looking for? What is this that people are saying with regards to Japanese first? Why is it people are pushing more towards that, or at least some people?
Well, it's important to understand that up until this time, Japan has not been a place where populist parties have done well. So this election is really the first time that we've seen parties like Sanseito and the Democratic Party for the People gain ground. And they've really appealed to the sense among Japanese voters that economic pressures are high, prices are rising, and they're falling behind. They're not being taken care of. There's very little evidence, actually, that immigration is leading to bad outcomes for middle-class Japanese people. But the populist parties in particular have managed to combine frustration with soaring numbers of tourists, fears about connections between foreigners and crime, and concerns about increasing numbers of foreign workers into a platform that really capitalizes on those anxieties and has produced results. But overall, only about 3% of Japan's population consists of foreigners. So this is really, still a rather fringe movement, and it's really about the framing and connecting with those economic concerns of voters.
OK, Professor Christy Govella, good to talk to you. Thank you very much. At least 19 people have died, most of them children, after a fighter jet on a training exercise crashed into a school in Bangladesh. The jet came down while classes were taking place at the Milestone School in the capital Dhaka. The pilot survived but is in intensive care. Yogita Lamai has the latest.
In a densely packed Dhaka neighbourhood, a tragedy beyond belief. A Bangladesh Air Force training jet crashed into a school, killing the pilot and hitting a building that housed classrooms for young students. Lessons were just ending for the day, officials said. Children in other parts of the school ran from the explosion. Farhan Hussain told the BBC's Bengali service what he saw.
I was standing outside the building and my best friend, the one I was in the exam hall with, he died right in front of my eyes. The plane fell on him. And many parents were inside too, because the younger children were coming out since it was the end of the school day.
Firefighters rushed in, battling to control the blaze. Parents who'd come for their daily school pickup were faced with an unimaginable scene. This woman was searching for her child, as was Sharmeen Sultana. I'm waiting for my son. He studies in this college. He called once after the incident, but I haven't been able to reach him since, she said. All afternoon, students were pulled out from the wreckage. Many have suffered burns. Those seriously injured were airlifted in military helicopters. Outside hospitals, people crowded for information. Some held up placards with appeals for blood. The military says the crash was caused by a mechanical failure and has promised a detailed investigation. Yogita Lamai, BBC News.
A man has been found guilty of murdering 2 people and dumping their remains in suitcases near the Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol. 35-year-old Justin Andres Mosquera had been staying with civil partners Albert Alfonso and Paul Longworth in their flat in West London. Ellie Price has more.
Justin Mosquera caught on camera by a cyclist who had stopped to help him. The attention spooked him. It was just before midnight. Mosquera had been on the Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol, struggling with 2 large suitcases. A suspicious sight even before he ran. The police were called.
I've got to be funny. The case is broken and it looks like it's really heavy and there's blood coming out of it. Yeah, we're convinced it's blood.
It was blood. In the bags, some of the remains of 2 men. 62-year-old Albert Alfonso and his partner, 71-year-old Paul Longworth, who Mosquera had murdered 2 days earlier.
Police used the address labels on the cases to find the rest of their remains in a freezer at their home, a flat in Shepherd's Bush in West London. The jury was shown pictures of the three men together having a good time, just 4 months before the couple were killed. They spent a holiday together in Colombia, where Mosquera was from. And this day trip to Brighton, less than a fortnight before the murders. But Mosquera and Mr. Alfonso had a more extreme relationship too. The older man would pay the defendant for explicit sex that they would often film. In fact, that's how they first met. The court heard Mosquera killed Paul Longworth first, beating him in the head at least 10 times with a hammer. He then hid his body in the storage section of Mr. Longworth's divan bed. Later that day, Mosquera then killed Albert Alfonso in a filmed sex session. The jury had to watch the video which showed the brutal stabbing, and then, once Mr. Alfonso was dead, showed Mosquera, who started singing to himself and broke into a dance before trying to access the dead man's bank accounts. Early the next afternoon, a chest freezer was delivered. Mosquera had bought it on Facebook Marketplace the day before. The next evening, he hired a man with a van, loaded the cases with the body parts on board and was driven to Bristol. And that's how he ended up on the Clifton Suspension Bridge. A move police say that led him to getting caught.
He could have committed, at that stage, almost the perfect murder. He's killed 2 people within the premises. They're the only 2 people that live in that address, so nobody else is going to come home and find them. He didn't need to dismember them. He didn't need to take him to Bristol. If he had, the morning of the 11th of July, booked himself a plane ticket back to Colombia, I am confident he could have committed those murders and, in inverted commas, got away with it.
But Mosquera didn't get away with it and now faces a lengthy sentence for murder. Ellie Price, BBC News.
We're back after this short break. Around the world and across the UK, this is The World Today on BBC News. Police say they're working with social media companies to identify users who have sent racist abuse to the England defender Jess Carter. The 27-year-old, who's played in every Lionesses match during the tournament in Switzerland, has confirmed she's stepping away from social media after receiving racist abuse online. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, gave his support, saying there's no place for racism in football or anywhere in society. Well, the Lionesses say they'll stop taking the knee ahead of their games, including tomorrow's semi-final against Italy. Well, let's speak to Leanne Sanderson, former England international, now broadcaster. Leanne, thank you so much for joining us. And just give me, first of all, your reaction to what you've been hearing.
Yeah, it's an absolute disgrace, to be honest. And first of all, that it doesn't surprise me. I think from somebody that experiences this type of thing every single day, I think the biggest shock for me is how much it shocked everybody, because I speak about this. I've been speaking about this for the last 5 years or so. And first and foremost, like Jess Carter, you know, her mental health, she hasn't had the best tournament, but nobody should ever, you know, be racially abused. It doesn't matter. This goes deeper than performances in tournaments. When you represent your country, it's the biggest honour. And every time you step out, there not many people become professional footballers and play for their nation and represent them. And these females are absolute heroes. We saw what they did when they won the European Championship. So, you know, the biggest thing for me is the amount of uproar that there has been, because I'm not surprised. And I think that's the biggest problem.
What needs to be done to protect these players more?
Social media companies need to do more. I've been to the House of Commons, House of Parliament. I've had 2 death threats. Police have had to get involved. And to be fair to the police, I think they've done an admirable job at trying to get it sorted straight away. I think the social media companies, they need to do more. They need to invest people, not just a robot or a generic response when you report this type of behaviour. It needs to be people. I mean, these companies have enough money. So for me, if I put up music, they take down they say copyright infringement straight away. So how can this be that people can racially abuse people like Jess Carter, people like myself and many other people in the public eye, and people just get away with it? So, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to eradicate it. But what we can do is speak about it. And, for someone like myself, I've spoken about this for my whole life, to be honest. And since I retired, I never really got any racist abuse when I played football. But when I retired, after every show, it happens to me, whether it be sexist, whether it be homophobia, whether it be racism. And I think I've just become desensitized to it. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. But I think for Jess Carter right now, her teammates are rallying around her. I think Serena Wiegmann has done a fantastic job at supporting the team, and the teammates have supported each other. Because I think if this was a few years ago under different coaches and different management, I don't think it would have been supported in this way. We need allies. Lucy Bronze has come out and spoke about it, Alex Greenwood, Lotte Wubben-Moy. So, and I'm happy the players are sticking together, and I hope that, Jess Carter is getting the support that she deserves, because, this isn't acceptable.
OK. Leanne, it's so good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us on The World Today.
Thank you.
Ryanair has said that in a bid to eliminate the scourge of passengers bringing oversized baggage to the boarding gate, the airline is considering increasing the commission it pays staff for identifying them. So currently, Ryanair employees are paid around €1.50 for every oversized cabin bag they identify, and passengers are then charged additional fees if their bag is deemed to be too large to bring on board the plane. Well, let's speak to the founder of Holiday Expert, Chelsea Dickinson. Chelsea, you give tips to people on how to avoid these kinds of mishaps, especially when travelling with Ryanair. What do you think about this move?
I am not surprised by it in the slightest, considering we got the fantastic and brilliant news that Ryanair would be increasing the size of its small cabin bag only about a week ago. I've been waiting for the but. You can call me a cynic, but I don't think Ryanair like giving away things for free. And the context of this is that the EU is pushing for standardised rules. So they're saying that we should not only be able to take one of these small bags that go under the seat in front of you on a plane, you should also get the one that goes over the top of your head as well in the overhead compartment. And they've approved these, and so it looks like this is going to be on the table for next year. But airlines such as Ryanair and Wizz Air, they are not going to like that, because they make so much money from what they call their ancillary products. That's the seats, that's the bags. And in fact, in their Q1 report today, they said that this has gone up 7% to €1.39 billion.
But to be fair, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here, it is a bit annoying. People do come onto these planes with a giant suitcase, a big handbag, a giant bag. I mean, it is too much, because what ends up happening is that you end up having to check your bag in at the gate because the plane is full of other people's bags, surely.
Absolutely. And you know what I think it is? I think people, look, Michael O'Leary, he likes to be loud and brash. I quite like him for it. But because of that, and because of they're quite witty on social media, they are almost like feeding the beast a bit. And I think more people are willing to push their luck a little bit when it comes to Ryanair. But you're absolutely right. We know what the luggage allowance is. And I always say this, look, I am one of those people, I'll hold my hands up. I do try and sneak a bag that's slightly too big onto a plane. But I always say, if I got stopped and they say, look, you're going to get charged, you're going to get fined €70, I'd be like, absolutely. I've saved so much money by taking a bag that's slightly too big on the plane with me over the years. And so, look, if they caught me out at this point, I'd be like, do you know what? You've earned that €70 and you've earned that bonus that you've got on top.
OK, well, listen, I get it. I get it from all sides. Chelsea, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Lovely to speak to you. Now, for more than 100 years, Girl Guides have been earning badges for their accomplishments. I was a Girl Guide. I'm not going to tell you which badges I got, but I was a good girl. OK, maybe I wasn't. In an historic update to the list, from today, there's going to be another 72 to collect. They can now be earned for example, holding a party, bee rescuing and fandom, as well as traditional pursuits that you've known and loved for many years. 20,000 children, parents and volunteers helped devise the new badges. The BBC's Ricky Bolletto reports.
A badge for kindness, courage, code breaking and fandoms.
This is the Calm Spaces badge. it's what we've done around us.
So you've helped to build this lovely tent?
Yeah.
Having an interest in entomology will also get you one.
So we made bug hotels. We had to use all sorts of different natural resources like pine cones, logs, strings.
A little bit more.
There's even a badge for making someone laugh.
My friend did an animal noise and then we had to copy them.
Did that make you laugh?
Yeah.
These new interest badges are being introduced across rainbows, brownies, guides and rangers. I joined TV presenter and CBBC icon Angelica Bell at the launch.
I mean, the badges are exciting, especially when you're young. They give you something to work for, you know, and I think that's always a good incentive. And, you know, I've met some of the Rainbow girls today, and they're proud of their badges.
It's the second time in Girl Guiding's history that new badges have been added to the programme. What do you do with all your badges once you get them?
I have them on my hoodie and a couple onto a blanket.
And here are the Girl Guides taking shelter.
Set up more than 100 years ago, today Girl Guiding has to compete with an ever-changing world. Be honest, what would you rather be doing? Swiping through a phone or doing something like this?
Doing something like this.
Why?
It's just a better way to spend your time.
Despite that,
Ready, steady, go!
there's growing demand for girls to get involved, but many are being forced to wait. There are more than 50,000 girls and young women on a waiting list, all wanting to join, and of course, Girl Guiding want that number to go down. Whoa! They say that can only happen if enough volunteers come forward to help out. What did I do wrong? The new badges aim to keep girls interested, but Girl Guiding needs a few more hands to make it happen. Ricky Belletto, BBC News.
Well, let's cross live now and speak to Girl Guiding Acting CEO Amanda Aziz. Amanda, lovely to talk to you. I have to say I was a Girl Guide and I'm trying desperately to get my daughter into her local Girl Guides. I'm still waiting to hear back from them, FYI. Tell me a little bit, but what I'm trying to say to you is that from what I know from my daughter's friends, there is still a lot of interest in Girl Guiding amongst girls. So why do you feel the need to bring in these new badges? What is it about these new pursuits you think is going to attract girls?
Yes, so absolutely. We have over 300,000 girls across the UK and 23,000 weekly groups. I'm sorry that your daughter hasn't got in yet. The reason why we brought these new badges through is 6 years ago when we launched this new programme, girls have been working really hard on all these badges. So they've already done 11.5 thousand interest badges since then, which is incredible. And so what they've told us is they want more. They were really popular. So what we've done is we've worked with 27,000 girls to hear from them what they really want. And then we've co-created, so we've made these badges over the past year with 11,000 girls and 700 weekly groups. They've even been designing the badges, so they're absolutely cute, the designs. So really, these are exactly what girls want. It's not adults deciding what girls want, it's what girls have told us.
And of the new ones, what's your favourite one, Amanda? What's the one that you want to go and get?
Quite like the micro adventures. So I think...
what is a micro adventure?
So if you live anywhere, actually, that could be town or city, or even in the countryside, you might think an adventure needs to be going on a big hike or abseiling or kayaking down a river. It really doesn't have to be like that. Having a micro adventure is just as fun, and it could be just a couple of hours. Say if you were in London trying to count how many parakeets you can find.
A lot if you live in southwest London, a lot. Let me bring in Millie Johnson now. Millie is a Girl Guiding advocate. It's lovely to talk to you, Millie. Tell me a little bit about what Girl Guides means to you and why you think these new badges are a good idea.
So I'm currently in Rangers and I'm also a young leader with Brownies. So I think the badges are an amazing idea because I've experienced it myself and seen firsthand how exciting and how empowering the badges can be for both my Brownies and for me and my friends in Rangers. So I think it gives us really great experiences in Girl Guiding to explore all different things.
I've asked Amanda this, but what's your favourite out of all these new badges? What's the one that you've got your eye on?
I think the one I'm most excited to try in Rangers is definitely personal style, because I love fashion and it looks really fun.
And how have the girls reacted to these badges, the ones that you've spoken to? Are they super excited about getting on with trying to, obtain them, to get them moving?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really exciting. There's definitely a few I've seen that I know my brownies will love to try.
And Amanda, before I let you go, tell me a little bit more about what the future holds for Girl Guides in this modern world.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've just created our new ambition, which is actually to double the size in 10 years, which is really exciting. But to do that, we want to reach the girls we're not currently reaching. So that's in the more deprived areas of the UK and different communities. So we're looking at different ways to reach them. So that's not just through our usual Rainbows, Brownies, Guides, Rangers, but partnering with others, like at schools, youth groups, and other areas in the community. So yeah, really exciting future.
Amanda Aziz, Millie Johnson, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for your company and your time. I'm going to go for the laughter badge. That's the one I think I can get quite easily. That's it from me. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. It's 7 p.m. in London. This is The World Today with Mariam Mashiri. Israel rejects a joint call from Western powers to end the war in Gaza. Britain's Foreign Secretary has just addressed Parliament.
Today, I join a statement of 31 foreign ministers as signatories with a simple, urgent message: the war in Gaza must end now.
It comes as Israel attacks one of the few areas in the territory left relatively unscathed and packed with displaced Gazans. At least 19 people are killed after a Bangladesh Air Force training jet crashes into a school in the capital Dhaka. Also coming up on The World Today. Be prepared for new badges. Girl Guiding adds new challenges for girls lucky enough to be part of the gang.
There are more than 50,000 girls and young women on a waiting list, all wanting to join. And of course, Girl Guiding want that number to go down. Whoa!
Hello and welcome to The World Today on BBC News. 25 Western powers are calling on the Israeli government to end the war in Gaza and find a better way to deliver urgent food aid to desperate Palestinians. Israel, though, has rejected the statement, saying it's disconnected from reality. Among the signatories are Britain, France, Italy, Spain and the Netherlands, all of them condemning the US and Israeli-backed aid distributor, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and the system of food delivery, which they say is dangerous, fuels instability and deprives Gazans of human dignity. Well, it says we are prepared to take further action, says the statement, to support an immediate ceasefire and a political pathway to security and to peace. Well, in the past hour, Foreign Secretary David Lammy also announced an extra £40 million worth of humanitarian assistance for Gaza this year. He also condemned the killings of civilians and said Israel must answer what justifies killing desperate, starving children. Have a listen.
There are near daily reports of Israeli troops opening fire on people to access food. Israeli jets have hit women and children waiting for a health clinic to open. An Israeli drone has struck down children filling water containers, which Israeli officials blamed on a technical error. Hamas is, of course, contributing to the chaos and taking advantage of it. But I utterly condemn the killing of civilians seeking to meet their basic needs.
Well, the statement by the Western powers comes as the humanitarian situation in Gaza has reached breaking point. Last week, the UN said almost 900 people have been killed while trying to get food in Gaza, almost 3/4 of them in the vicinity of those GHF sites. Well, famine is also taking hold in Gaza. At least 19 people have died of starvation in Gaza in the past 24 hours alone, according to health officials there. Well, the GHF spokesman, Chapin Fay, admits there is a problem, but he blames the UN.
But GHF was never meant to meet the needs of the population alone. It is not enough. That is why we have routinely, and from the beginning, pushed for the UN and others to operate alongside us in Gaza. There have been many, many false reports that the UN is not allowed to operate in Gaza, that GHF has replaced them, that 4 GHF sites have replaced 400 UN access points. That is just not true. The World Food Program themselves acknowledge there are no restrictions on the aid they can bring in. They and others have tens of thousands of pallets of aid sitting inside Gaza, rotting, just out of reach of those who need it. You don't see this on the news. The media isn't reporting it. So many who hear this think it can't be true. I understand this directly myself. It seems so implausible to me that humanitarians would let food rot when people are starving.
Well, the UN has rejected that appeal for help by the group chosen by Israel to deliver aid because it uses armed guards and is clearly linked to Israel. The UN says its own attempts to deliver supplies to Gaza are repeatedly blocked. Well, let's cross live now and speak to our correspondent in Westminster, Helen Catt. Helen, let's go back to that Foreign Secretary statement earlier on in Parliament. Strong words there from David Lammy, and also the UK part of this group of signatories condemning some of the actions of Israel in Gaza.
It was, yes, and that was something that the Foreign Secretary referenced when he was speaking in Parliament. He appeared to find out, actually, while he was at the dispatch box giving his speech, one of his backbenchers, Emily Thornberry, mentioned that Israel had not accepted this, and that appeared to be him hearing about that and being quite disappointed that it happened so quickly. But a lot of what he said in the Commons did echo what we've heard in that joint statement. He talked about the current aid system being inhumane, dangerous, and said it deprives Gazans of dignity. He also criticised what he said was that the fact that Palestinians have been moved out of 86% of Gaza, saying there were now 2 million people trapped in an area of just over 20 square miles. You heard him there in the clip that you played saying that he utterly condemned the killing of civilians who were seeking aid. He also said that Israel's actions were doing untold damage to Israel's standing in the world. So there was quite a lot of very strong language. As he mentioned again that the UK, as you said, would be giving an extra £40 million of humanitarian assistance this year. Now, some of these sentiments were echoed by others around the Commons. The Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel from the Conservatives also said she utterly condemned these attacks, but she said that words were not saving lives, and she was among a number of MPs who were questioning whether the UK government could be doing more in practical terms to try and bring about this ceasefire.
OK, Helen, thank you very much indeed for that. Helen Catt there in Westminster. Well, meanwhile, Israel's military offensive in Gaza continues. It's launched a new ground and air assault on the city of Deir al-Balah in central Gaza, which until now had largely been spared from the intense bombardment we've seen in other parts of the Strip. Across the city, we have had reports of tanks and military vehicles advancing into built-up areas under air cover and shelling from heavy artillery. Well, the IDF had warned people of the impending assault. Copies of this leaflet were dropped from the sky over the weekend. People were told to head south towards Al-Mawasi. The area is packed, though, with thousands of displaced people from southern Gaza. There are next to no safe options left in Gaza. Well, it's believed some of the hostages still being held in Gaza are actually in Deir al-Balah. Udi Goren is the cousin of Tal Haimi, who's among the hostages who were killed. He gave this response to the statement by the UK and those other signatories.
I am a cousin of a hostage, and I want to see him back home. And, you know, these large-scale diplomatic efforts, I wish I could say something intelligent, but at the end of the day, if all of these countries pull together, and what's on the line here is not tariffs, it's not money, it's human lives, it's people suffering, it's a catastrophe on both sides of the border. Why are they still waiting? Why are they still hesitating? The fates of the Israeli hostages and the Gazan civilians is linked together. And once the war ends, it brings alleviation to both sides. And this is the only effort that everybody should drive for.
Well, Dr. Julie Norman is an associate professor in politics and international relations at the University College London. Here's her reaction to that statement on Gaza from those Western countries.
This was a very direct statement, very forceful. As far as statements go, it was very strongly worded, very clearly saying this war must end, very critical of the current humanitarian aid devastation, largely driven by the GHF, the U.S. and Israeli-led operation there right now, and very much calling for an end to the conflict more broadly, highlighting issues around settlements, around what's going on in the West Bank. And Lamy's statements just now in the House of Commons, very forcefully reiterating that. With all that said, it's good as a statement goes. I think now what people here in the region are looking at is what comes after this. Is this the culmination? Is this statement the end? Or is this the beginning of actually some actions to back up these words that will actually result in some kind of change in policy and change on the ground?
And that, I guess, is the big question. What do you think?
Well, I think there's some different options. I mean, we do know that France, at least, is leaning towards recognition of a Palestinian state. Some of the wording in the statement, some of which imply that if things do not change, that France and other states might pursue that. Lamy, I think, iterated some of the steps that the UK is taking. But at the end of the day, I think most of the states that sign on to this are aware that their leverage is still somewhat limited. The US obviously is not part of this statement, very much backs Israel. Israel has already rejected this statement. So in terms of real changes, I think they're realistic about the impact of these words, but at the same time felt it was better than silence and needed to be said nonetheless. And we'll see where they take it from here.
Well, Rachel Cummings is the team leader for the Save the Children charity in Gaza. She joined me from Deir al-Balah.
The situation is desperate in Gaza for children and their families. Yesterday morning there was evacuation notices issued to southwest Deir al-Balah, about 3 kilometres from where we are here, and that impacted between 50 and 80,000 people who are now having to make a very difficult decision to relocate, to be displaced into Gaza, where there is no land, there is no space, and nowhere is safe. So the situation is very, very challenging here.
And what about the situation in terms of aid and food? We've heard today from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, backed by Israel and the US. They blame the UN. Are they right to do so?
I haven't heard that reference to the UN, but the situation for children in Gaza and the access of civilians to food is absolutely desperate. There is no food in the markets the last 3 days. The markets have been empty. I was in Deir al-Balah yesterday, and the markets are empty. My team are sharing with me they have cash in their pockets, but there is no food to buy, and their children are crying all day, all night for hunger. The situation is terrible. We're seeing increased number of children in our clinics who are malnourished. Of course we are. We're seeing an increase in the number of pregnant women and breastfeeding women who are malnourished. It's very, very concerning.
What's the answer?
The answer is a definitive ceasefire for Gaza. We need peace. We need humanitarian supplies to enter Gaza at scale. We need access to children and their families, populations in the most desperate of situations. And I need to be able to provide a degree of safety and security for my teams, to be able to move around Gaza, to be able to provide life-saving essential services and supplies to children here.
Well, our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, gave her assessment on why she believes the UK and these other signatories have signed this letter today.
Kind of language that they are using now, again doubling down on their call, which they've made many times before, that the ceasefire, there has to be a ceasefire, the hostages have to come home, the war has to end. Now they really are spelling it out, that the suffering of Gazans has reached new depths. They were directly critical of this new Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, trying to puncture any idea that this could in any way be an alternative to the UN system, the other aid agencies who had been operating when they could, when Israel allowed the eased up on the restrictions. But of course, not surprisingly, it was immediately rejected by Israel, as they have rejected every statement, basically saying you are playing into Hamas's hands. But I think the question now, Miriam, is why now, 20 months into the war, has Israel decided to expand its operations going into Deir al-Balah, the central belt of the Gaza Strip, whereas you've been hearing from the aid agencies, it has become a place of, let us say, relative safety. It is a humanitarian hub. The water system is working there, the desalination plant, the warehouses. The fear is, and you've heard it just expressed on your program, is Israel going after that? Or does Israel have a military target it wants to go after? Many questions are being asked, but the only force, the only voice that Israel seems to want to listen to is President Trump. And there are reports, even though we've heard them so many times before, that a ceasefire is close, achingly close, that President Trump is putting pressure on Israel to accept, pressure on Hamas. And just before we came on air, there is a report. Israel has accepted most of the Hamas's conditions. Hamas has accepted most of Israel. And President Trump is actually weighing in as well. So Israel trying to maximize this last moment. We'll have to wait and see how long this operation lasts and if indeed a ceasefire does take place.
That's Lise Doucette there. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching The World Today on BBC News. The Environment Secretary says the water industry is broken and the water regulator Ofwat will be scrapped. New bodies in England and Wales will take over responsibility for the sector. The change comes in after nearly 90 recommendations in a wide-ranging review of the water industry. Here's Simon Jack.
Water, a basic human need. There are 50 billion litres of water in this reservoir near Cambridge. The UK hasn't built a new one of these in 30 years. And that kind of underinvestment means the water industry is failing. And according to a new report, weak regulation has been part of the problem. The government confirmed today it would merge the responsibilities of 4 existing regulators into one body and will accept other recommendations, including a new water ombudsman to give consumers a more powerful voice and an end to companies monitoring their own sewage and leak performance. The government specified the report should not consider renationalising the water industry as one of its recommendations. Many support it, so why rule it out?
Nationalising the water companies would cost around £100 billion. That's money we don't have. We'd have to take it from the National Health Service and from education in order to give it to the people that own the water companies who have polluted our rivers. It would take years of legal wrangling to unpick the current ownership models, and during that time there would be no investment.
The water companies agree regulation has been poor, but for different reasons. They say Ofwat hasn't allowed them to charge enough in recent years to fund the needed investment.
We need massive investment across all of the United Kingdom so that we can withstand the pressures of climate change, end sewage flowing into our waterways, and make sure we have enough water for our businesses to grow and our homes to be developed.
The water crisis has been years in the making, and today's report and government reaction has not suddenly taken the heat out of campaigners' anger.
The beating heart of this debacle is that corporate greed, the financial engineering, the exorbitant salaries, all of the £84 billion worth of our money water companies have made off with. We were promised a proper written branch, wide-ranging review, including ownership and structure. We were promised champagne. All we've actually got is sour milk.
In what now appears to be one of Ofwat's last interventions, it approved average bill rises of 30% over the next 5 years, with a big chunk of that starting in April.
It's hard to imagine how things could get much worse for the water industry. Ageing infrastructure, overwhelmed by new challenges like rising population and changing climate trends. But they still could. The tens of billions the companies have committed to invest over the next few years will take time to have an effect. Meanwhile, customers are getting hit in the here and now, and they will feel they are paying the price for the sins of the past.
The government hopes today will be seen as a first stepping stone to recovery. Simon Jack, BBC News.
Well, as you've been hearing, bills are set to rise by 30% over the next 5 years, with serious pollution incidents in England by water and sewage companies having risen by 60% in the last year to their highest total on record. Meanwhile, hosepipe bans have come into effect across parts of the country, including today in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, from where Duncan Kennedy sent this report.
For Southern Water's 2.2 million customers, water restrictions are now in place. That means customers lugging around watering cans. But when you're 83 years old, like David Horton, life is now more difficult.
What's it like having to haul water all that way? Quite painful at times with my bad knee.
David says companies like Southern Water haven't invested enough.
I think that a lot of more money should have been put into building reservoirs and storing water so that in times like this we have it so that we don't suffer. We pay enough money for it.
Whether it's leaks or sewage discharges, Southern Water has faced years of problems. Nigel Hadwin runs this grocer's store and has seen his bills rise by around 30% in the past year.
On a day like today, with lots of news about water, including Southern Water, what's your view of them?
Let's face it, our bills have gone up by about a third this year. That's a lot of money for us, a lot of money for everybody. They could do an awful lot more with that money.
In a statement, Southern Water told us we have to respond to the widespread and prolonged dry weather affecting our region, and added our teams are working 24/7 to find and fix leaks faster than ever. Southern isn't alone in facing problems, but customers say they just want them resolved. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News.
A man has been found guilty of murdering 2 people and dumping their remains in suitcases near the Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol. Ellie Price has more.
Yosti Mosquera caught on camera by a cyclist who had stopped to help him. The attention spooked him. It was just before midnight. Mosquera had been on the Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol struggling with 2 large suitcases. A suspicious sight even before he ran. The police were called.
I've got to be funny, the case is broken and it looks like it's really heavy and there's blood coming out of it. Yeah, we're convinced it's blood.
It was blood. In the bags, some of the remains of 2 men. 62-year-old Albert Alfonso and his partner, 71-year-old Paul Longworth, who Mosquera had murdered 2 days earlier. Police used the address labels on the cases to find the rest of their remains in a freezer at their home, a flat in Shepherd's Bush in West London. The jury was shown pictures of the 3 men together having a good time, just 4 months before the couple were killed. They spent a holiday together in Colombia, where Mosquera was from. And this day trip to Brighton, less than a fortnight before the murders. But Mosquera and Mr. Alfonso had a more extreme relationship too. The older man would pay the defendant for explicit sex that they would often film. In fact, that's how they first met. The court heard Mosquera killed Paul Longworth first, beating him in the head at least 10 times with a hammer. He then hid his body in the storage section of Mr. Longworth's divan bed. Later that day, Mosquera then killed Albert Alfonso in a filmed sex session. The jury had to watch the video which showed the brutal stabbing and then, once Mr. Alfonso was dead, showed Mosquera, who started singing to himself and broke into a dance before trying to access the dead man's bank accounts. Early the next afternoon, a chest freezer was delivered. Mosquera had bought it on Facebook Marketplace the day before. The next evening, he hired a man with a van, loaded the cases with the body parts on board and was driven to Bristol. And that's how he ended up on the Clifton Suspension Bridge. A move police say that led him to getting caught.
He could have committed at that stage almost the perfect murder. He's killed 2 people within a premises. They're the only 2 people that live in that address, so nobody else is going to come home and find them. He didn't need to dismember them. He didn't need to take them to Bristol. If he had the morning of the 11th of July booked himself a plane ticket back to Colombia, I am confident he could have committed those murders and, in inverted commas, got away with it.
But Mosquera didn't get away with it and now faces a lengthy sentence for murder. Ellie Price, BBC News.
A 10-year-old boy who died in a school bus crash in Somerset last week has been named by police as Oliver Price. Pupils and staff from Minehead Middle School were on the bus which crashed on Thursday afternoon while returning from a trip to Exmoor Zoo. Spies at the UK's Intelligence and Safety Agency, the GCHQ, say they're dealing with at least 1 ransomware attack every day. They're tasked with stopping such attacks. The National Cyber Security Centre is working with Marks & Spencer after its IT system was shut down last year. BBC Panorama has also been told that in 2025 it's likely to be the worst year on record for ransomware attacks. Here's Richard Bilton.
When the attack comes, it can be hard to spot.
We always got a handover from the night supervisor, so first thing you get out of bed in the morning, cup of tea, bang up the email. The night supervisor had sort of written on there that he'd suffered some challenges through the night with some computer systems not working quite properly.
In 2023, KNP was running 500 trucks, most under the brand name Knights of Old. A ransomware gang locked their computers and stole their data. This message appeared.
For now, let's keep all the tears and resentment to ourselves and try to build a constructive dialogue.
The gang demanded a ransom to put things back, but KNP didn't have the money. The company went bust because the hackers had worked out an employee's password.
Have you ever told them? No. Why? Would you want to know if it was you?
Disruption at Marks and Spencer's operations after a cyber attack over Easter is still continuing.
It's been a summer of cyber attacks. M&S and the Co-op both breached. It means high pressure in here. This is the front line. Panorama has been given access to the National Cyber Security Centre, part of GCHQ. These are spies fighting cyber gangs.
It's incredibly common. I mean, we get in at least one report a day of an organisation being encrypted. There are so many attackers out there targeting organisations all the time that, all you need to do is slip up once and they might find a chink that they can get in.
As we stand at the moment with ransomware, are the criminals winning?
I don't think I'd say the criminals are winning.
They're doing well, though, aren't they?
The criminals are doing well. At the end of the day, we see so many cyber attacks that aren't successful. Sadly, it isn't a surprise when one or two do get through and they create the scale of impact that we've seen.
If prevention fails, another team steps in. This unit from the National Crime Agency is helping Marks and Spencer. Recently, 4 people were arrested.
It's incredibly busy. The demand has increased significantly year on year. I predict it's going to be the worst year on record for ransomware attacks in the UK, for sure.
Ransomware is the growing, lucrative crime that threatens us all. Richard Bilton, BBC News.
Well, if you are in the UK and you want to find out more about this story, you can watch the Panorama on which the story is based. It's called Fighting Cyber Criminals. It's on tonight at 8:30 on BBC One. That's in an hour's time. Or you can also watch it on the BBC iPlayer right now. You're watching The World Today on BBC News. I'm back after this short break. This is The World Today on BBC News. The latest headlines. Israel rejects a joint call from 25 Western powers to end the Gaza war and overhaul aid distribution. It comes as Israel attacks one of the few areas in the territory left unscathed, sparking a new fear of a humanitarian disaster. At least 19 people are killed after a Bangladesh Air Force training jet crashes into a school in the capital Dhaka. Police are investigating after England defender Jess Carter says she was targeted with racist abuse online during the UEFA Women's Euros in Switzerland. Be prepared for new badges. Girl Guiding adds new challenges for the lucky girls in the pack. Bangladesh is observing a day of mourning for the 20 people killed when an Air Force training jet crashed into a school playground in the capital Dhaka. More than 170 others were injured when the jet came down while classes were taking place at the Milestone School in the capital. Officials said the plane had apparently suffered a mechanical failure. Yogita Lamai has the latest.
In a densely packed Dhaka neighbourhood, a tragedy beyond belief. A Bangladesh Air Force training jet crashed into a school, killing the pilot and hitting a building that housed classrooms for young students. Lessons were just ending for the day, officials said. Children in other parts of the school ran from the explosion. Farhan Hussain told the BBC's Bengali service what he saw.
I was standing outside the building and my best friend, the one I was in the exam hall with, he died right in front of my eyes. The plane fell on him. And many parents were inside too, because the younger children were coming out since it was the end of the school day.
Firefighters rushed in, battling to control the blaze. Parents who'd come for their daily school pickup were faced with an unimaginable scene. This woman was searching for her child, as was Sharmeen Sultana. I'm waiting for my son. He studies in this college. He called once after the incident, but I haven't been able to reach him since, she said. All afternoon, students were pulled out from the wreckage. Many have suffered burns. Those seriously injured were airlifted in military helicopters. Outside hospitals, people crowded for information. Some held up placards with appeals for blood. The military says the crash was caused by a mechanical failure and has promised a detailed investigation. Yogita Lamai, BBC News.
In Syria, a level of calm has returned to the city of Sueda after a week of brutal clashes between Druze fighters and Bedouin gunmen. Local media say hundreds of Bedouin have been evacuated from the city as part of the ceasefire agreement, but it's a fragile peace. More than 1,100 people were killed in the fighting in recent weeks, with bitter recriminations on all sides. Well, now the Syrian government forces are in place around the city to restore order, but the Bedouin tribes are threatening to resume their offensive unless the hostages and their injured are returned. Our correspondent John Donnison gave us this update from Sueda.
So what we've got here today is a bit of a standoff. You've got a lot more Syrian government forces here on the last checkpoint before you get to Sueda, and they're blocking the way. Now what they're saying is that there are Druze snipers on that road heading towards Sueda, and that's making it too dangerous for journalists and aid trucks to pass. There are still quite a lot of Bedouin fighters hanging around here, waiting, they say, to go back in if the fighting resumes. But for the moment, things seem relatively calm. There's been a lot of focus today on getting the injured out of Sueda. We have seen some people coming out. The International Red Cross went in and got some people, brought them out and took them to the nearby city of Daraa. We spoke to some of the injured there and they said it's pretty bleak in Sueda itself. But generally, it's very difficult to know exactly what's going on down that road because we can't go there.
Well, Neil Quilliam is a Middle East expert at the think tank Chatham House. I spoke to him and asked if he believed the ceasefire could hold.
I mean, it's going to be a short-term ceasefire. The tensions in the area between the Bedouin and the various Druze militias is so rife that it's hard to see it holding unless the central government intervenes, and I don't mean that militarily, but I mean sort of puts in place some reconciliation programs, tries to build on the de-escalation, but that's going to require some tact, some investment of time and energy. So I'm doubtful that this current ceasefire is going to hold.
And the tact, the time and energy, will that be helped by more involvement from the international community, do you think, from Europe, the US, Gulf states?
Absolutely. I mean, all of those actors, have a lot vested in the al-Sharaa government and really wants it to succeed. So they are really pushing hard, and we can see how much the US is intervening and mediating in this space. And they will be encouraging him and the interim government, to put in place steps to reconcile these tensions, not just in the south, but certainly on the coastal areas. And of course, there's still the big issue that needs to be sort of addressed. I mean, there have been several attempts at that, and that's sort of reconciling, the Kurdish, the SDF in the Kurdish region in the northeast with the central Damascus authorities.
And what of Israel? Of course, we saw Israel attacking certain parts of Damascus, saying it's supporting the Druze minority. Have Israel helped, do you think?
No, not at all. I mean, Israel has really sort of played in and played up tensions in the region. They are clearly trying to create a buffer, and they've made very clear that they want to demilitarize the south, and that's Suwaida, Dera, and Quneitra. And they have sent a very strong message to al-Sharaa that this is a non-negotiable for them. We've seen the US step in and mediate, but I don't see Israel's intervention in Syria is helping at all. In fact, it's undermining the sort of national project.
Let's go to Japan now, where elections on Sunday resulted in the ruling coalition losing its majority in the country's upper house, and a once fringe right-wing opposition party walking away with 14 new seats. So what's happened? Well, Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has said he has no plans to quit despite the results reflecting frustration at the coalition of the Liberal Democratic Party over rising prices and the threat of those US tariffs. And it's the small right-wing party, Sanseito, that's made the biggest gains. It's built its platform on a nationalist Japanese-first agenda, with its rise in popularity perhaps reflecting growing unease over immigration and over-tourism. Its leader, Sohei Kamiyahas, has said he draws inspiration from Donald Trump's bold political style. Well, Professor Christy Govella is an Associate Professor of Japanese Politics and International Relations at the University of Oxford. She spoke to me about what's happening in the world of politics in Japan. Have a listen.
Well, as you just mentioned, the ruling party and its coalition partner have suffered a pretty major defeat in this upper house election. And the election was overwhelmingly dominated by domestic economic issues in particular. So it really reflects a sense among Japanese people that there are problems that need to be solved that the current government is not addressing, and that they want some change.
What kind of change are they looking for? What is this that people are saying with regards to Japanese first? Why is it people are pushing more towards that, or at least some people?
Well, it's important to understand that up until this time, Japan has not been a place where populist parties have done well. So this election is really the first time that we've seen parties like Sanseito and the Democratic Party for the People gain ground. And they've really appealed to the sense among Japanese voters that economic pressures are high, prices are rising, and they're falling behind. They're not being taken care of. There's very little evidence, actually, that immigration is leading to bad outcomes for middle-class Japanese people. But the populist parties in particular have managed to combine frustration with soaring numbers of tourists, fears about connections between foreigners and crime, and concerns about increasing numbers of foreign workers into a platform that really capitalizes on those anxieties and has produced results. But overall, only about 3% of Japan's population consists of foreigners. So this is really, still a rather fringe movement, and it's really about the framing and connecting with those economic concerns of voters.
Around the world and across the UK, you're watching The World Today on BBC News. Police say they're working with social media companies to identify users who have sent racist abuse to the England defender Jess Carter. The 27-year-old, who's played in every Lionesses match during the tournament in Switzerland, has confirmed she's stepping away from social media after receiving racist abuse online. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, gave his support, saying there's no place for racism in football or anywhere in society. The Lionesses say they'll stop taking the knee ahead of the games, including tomorrow's semi-final against Italy. Well, England manager Sarina Wiegman has been giving her reaction.
It's ridiculous discussing what's happening, and that goes beyond football, so we had to pay attention to that and support Jess. Of course, she's not the only one who gets this abuse or this racism, and that's why she wanted to address it, and she's fully supported by the team and by us and by myself.
Well, the former England player and now international broadcaster Leanne Sanderson said the abuse is unacceptable, but unsurprising.
I think from somebody that experiences this type of thing every single day, I think the biggest shock for me is how much it shocked everybody, because I've been speaking about this for the last 5 years or so, and first and foremost, like Jess Carter, her mental health, she hasn't had the best tournament, but nobody should ever, be racially abused. It doesn't matter. This goes deeper than performances in tournaments. When you represent your country, it's the biggest honour. And every time you step out there, not many people become professional footballers and play for their nation and represent them. And these females are absolute heroes. We saw what they did when they won the European Championship. So, the biggest thing for me is the amount of uproar that there has been, because I'm not surprised. And I think that's the biggest problem.
What needs to be done to protect these players more?
Social media companies need to do more. I've been to the House of Commons, House of Parliament. I've had 2 death threats. Police have had to get involved. And to be fair to the police, I think they've done an admirable job at trying to get it sorted straight away. I think the social media companies, they need to do more. They need to invest people, not just a robot or a generic response when you report this type of behaviour. It needs to be people. I mean, these companies have enough money. So for me, if I put up music, they take down they say copyright infringement straight away. So how can this be that people can racially abuse people like Jess Carter, people like myself and many other people in the public eye, and people just get away with it? So, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to eradicate it. But what we can do is speak about it. And, for someone like myself, I've spoken about this for my whole life, to be honest. And since I retired, I never really got any racist abuse when I played football. But when I retired, after every show, it happens to me, whether it be sexist, whether it be homophobia, whether it be racism. And I think I've just become desensitized to it. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. But I think for Jess Carter right now, her teammates are rallying around her. I think Sarina Wiegman has done a fantastic job at supporting the team, and the teammates have supported each other. Because I think if this was a few years ago under different coaches and different management, I don't think it would have been supported in this way. We need allies. Lucy Bronze has come out and spoke about it, Alex Greenwood, Lotte Wubben-Moy. So, and I'm happy the players are sticking together, and I hope that, Jess Carter is getting the support that she deserves, because, this isn't acceptable.
Former Lioness Leanne Sanderson there. Now, Ryanair has said that in a bid to eliminate the scourge, its words, not ours, of passengers bringing oversized baggage to the boarding gate, the airline is considering increasing the commission it pays staff for identifying them. Currently, Ryanair employees are paid around €1.50 for every oversized cabin bag they identify, and passengers are then charged also additional fees if their bag is deemed to be too large to bring on board the plane. Well, Chelsea Dickinson is the founder of Holiday Expert. She gives tips on avoiding these kinds of travel mishaps like additional bag fees. She says she expected this move from Ryanair.
I am not surprised by it in the slightest, considering we got the fantastic and brilliant news that Ryanair would be increasing the size of its small cabin bag only about a week ago. I've been waiting for the but. You can call me a cynic, but I don't think Ryanair like giving away things for free. And the context of this is that the EU is pushing for standardised rules, so they're saying that we should not only be able to take one of these small bags that go under the seat in front of you on a plane, you should also get the one that goes over the top of your head as well in the overhead compartment. And they've approved these, and so it looks like this is going to be on the table for next year. But airlines such as Ryanair and Wizz Air, they are not going to like that, because they make so much money from what they call their ancillary products. That's the seats, that's the bags. And in fact, in their Q1 report today, they said that this has gone up 7% to €1.39 billion.
But to be fair, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here, it is a bit annoying. People do come onto these planes with a giant suitcase, a big handbag, a giant bag. I mean, it is too much, because what ends up happening is that you end up having to check your bag in at the gate because the plane is full of other people's bags, surely.
Absolutely. And you know what I think it is? I think people, look, Michael O'Leary, he likes to be loud and brash. I quite like him for it. But because of that, and because of like they're quite witty on social media, they are almost like feeding the beast a bit. And I think more people are willing to push their luck a little bit when it comes to Ryanair. But you're absolutely right. We know what the luggage allowance is. And I always say this, look, I am one of those people, I'll hold my hands up. I do try and sneak a bag that's slightly too big onto a plane. But I always say, if I got stopped and they say, look, you're going to get charged, you're going to get fined €70, I'd be like, absolutely. I've saved so much money by taking a bag that's slightly too big on the plane with me over the years. And so, look, if they caught me out at this point, I'd be like, do you know what? You've earned that €70 and you've earned that bonus that you've got on top.
Chelsea there. Now, one of the world's largest private collections of accordions is going under the hammer at the auction in Belfast. More than 700 instruments are up for sale. They've all been collected by one man. The late Ken Hopkins was a very well-known accordion player in Northern Ireland. Sarah Gervin has more.
A decades-long passion for accordions has resulted in one of the biggest private collections in the world. Known to many simply as the Accordion Man, Ken Hopkins collected and restored the instruments for most of his life. Following his death last year, his prize collection is now under the hammer in Belfast.
He absolutely loved accordions and it became an obsession. He was a musician himself, an incredible accordionist, and he started purchasing accordions and going to shows and auctions, and it just escalated to this now.
It took 5 trucks to move the instruments, all 750 of them, from Ken's County Down home, where they lined every single room.
The house was just absolutely packed with them. You would arrive down and there'd be like a coach load of people out the front, and they would be just parading up and down through the house to see the collection. So it was like an accordion museum.
But without the space to store so many instruments, his children want them to go to homes where they'll be played and appreciated. And of course, the irony is you don't play the accordion.
Not a note in my head. Couldn't play it. I've had all the singing lessons, guitar lessons, piano lessons, but can't play a note.
The auction house is already getting interest from potential buyers all over the world.
It's the first time we've ever had anything like this. It's been a mammoth task from start to finish, just because of the sheer volume of accordions. We believe the collection to be the largest private collection in the world. We've had people from all over being in contact with us.
Move past all these accordions. So, as you can see, it's handcrafted. It's a Dari constellation, and it has wagons and horses on it. It's absolutely beautiful.
What do you think your dad would make of all this?
He would love all this, you know, he was really a showman. Music's been really a part of our lives, and, you know, every birthday, every Christmas, every celebrations, but they need to be played, they should be played, and they, you know, it'll be lovely to think that there'll be somebody else's birthday playing Happy Birthday, or, you know, and bring more joy, and, you know, as they say, the music will go on.
Sarah Garvin, BBC News in Belfast.
In this canal, there's something in the water. This is the Waste Shark, an autonomous robot that's taking on a challenge. And it's a big one. With some estimates, there could be hundreds of millions of metric tons of plastic pollution circulating in the marine environment.
It's a problem in canals, rivers, oceans, all around the world.
But is this drone the answer?
Marine plastic is a relatively new challenge that we face, but we're treating it with very old methods. People in boats fishing out plastic all day long. And I looked around and couldn't find anything that was new that was trying to tackle this problem. So eventually I just sort of said, well, what about robots? And then I started to create my own dream of how I would do it, and this is really the reality of that. The actual hardware is just a catamaran hull with a basket in the middle, and it sees the trash, goes over it, traps that trash and brings it back to shore. But it has a very powerful software on top of it that gives it autonomy through the water. It can see ducks, it can see boats, it can navigate itself around there.
There are a couple of ways to control the robot then. How do you do it?
That's right. So you can control it manually with the remote control, and on the remote control you just steer it, and through the camera you can see where you're going if you can't see it anymore. And then you can have it in autonomous mode, and autonomy can be one of two things. It can either follow a set route, so GPS points on a map and it'll hit all those points, or you have it go in a region, so you define an area where it's supposed to go and it will clean that whole area. You can of course predict with trash a lot of the time where the trash is going to be, right? It's going to be downwind, for example, so you can tell it cleverly where it's supposed to go. But the next phase, of course, is that it does that for you. So we're working on AI technology to recognize trash specifically.
As it's travelling autonomously through the water, how does it know what it's coming up against? It's not going to pick up a bird or a fish or wildlife.
No, that's right. So it has a LiDAR sensor to see if there's any objects that are in its way, so that it avoids any obstacles like, I don't know, a boat, a duck, whatever.
Of course, sometimes the rubbish is a bigger problem, and for that, we need a bigger robot.
That's why the team are now working on the Mega Shark, a drone that can be controlled by an operator or still use the remote control or autonomy features. And no matter the size of the vehicle, there are big challenges in developing tech that can navigate itself on water.
There's reflections, there's current, there's wind. So yes, object recognition is tricky because, well, you can see it today. It's a sunny day, which means, you know, silver water. So there's that, but also moving about in the water is differently than saying moving on land. On the water, you're likely to be pushed around by waves, by current, by wind.
The smaller waste shark can gather around 500 kilograms to a ton of rubbish over a 24-hour period. It could never be enough on its own to eradicate this environmental issue, but it's one solution that could make a dent in the problem.
There's many things that are exciting about it, right? You're doing something useful for the world. We're trying to clean up the waterways, but technically it's also very interesting, right? Creating autonomy on the water is an area where there's not that many people working on it, so it's really, you know, inventing something new that potentially can have a huge impact on the world.
My dad was a farmer who worked for the government in New Zealand, but he also had a radio talk show for farmers. He'd patiently listen to every conflicting account of what was and wasn't working before reporting back. I was bored stiff by talk of yields and rotations, but that was really influential to how I approached my journalism. Building trust by taking the time to understand a situation clearly before reporting a story. In a 24-hour news cycle, patience can be so frustrating, but it's a crucial tool. I don't rush to be the first. I strive to get it right. I'm Lucy Hockings on BBC News Now.
Hello, I'm Lauren Taylor. This is The Context on BBC News.
But I utterly condemn the killing of civilians seeking to meet their basic needs.
There have been many false reports that the UN is not allowed to operate in Gaza, that 4 GHF sites have replaced 400 UN access points. That is just not true.
Why now, 20 months into the war, has Israel decided to expand its operations going into Deir al-Balah, the central belt of the Gaza Strip, where you've been hearing from the aid agencies, it has become a place of, let us say, relative safety.
What comes after this? Is this the culmination? Is this statement the end? Or is this the beginning of actually some actions to back up these words that will actually result in some kind of change in policy and change on the ground?
Hello, Israel has tonight rejected a joint call from Western powers to end the war in Gaza, in which 25 countries said further bloodshed serves no purpose. Britain's Foreign Secretary has just addressed the UK Parliament about the situation. We'll have full analysis in just a moment. Well, it comes as Israel attacks one of the few areas in the territory left relatively unscathed and packed with displaced Gazans, sparking new fears of a humanitarian disaster. Also on the programme, we'll be discussing the situation in Syria, where a level of calm has returned to the city of Suwaida after a week of brutal tribal clashes between Druze fighters and Bedouin gunmen. Welcome to the programme. 25 Western powers, including the UK, are calling on the Israeli government to end the war in Gaza and find a better way to deliver urgent food aid to desperate Palestinians. Israel has rejected a statement signed by a group of countries saying that it is disconnected from reality. Among the signatories are Britain, France, Italy, Spain and the Netherlands. All of them condemning the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and a system of food delivery which they say is dangerous, fuels instability and deprives Gazans of human dignity. We are prepared to take further action, says the statement, to support an immediate ceasefire and a political pathway to security and peace. Well, last week, the UN said almost 900 people had been killed while trying to get food in Gaza, almost 3/4 of them in the vicinity of Gaza Humanitarian Foundation sites. Meanwhile, the famine is taking hold in Gaza. At least 19 people have died of starvation in Gaza in the past 24 hours. That's according to health officials there. Well, in the last 2 hours, the British Foreign Secretary David Lammy gave a statement to MPs in the House of Commons. Let's hear some of what he said.
Today, I join a statement of 31 foreign ministers as signatories with a simple, urgent message: the war in Gaza must end now. There is no military solution. Negotiations will secure the hostages. Further bloodshed serves no purpose. Hamas and Israel must both commit to a ceasefire now, and the next ceasefire must be the last ceasefire. I thank the United States, Qatar and Egypt for their tireless efforts, and I'm sure all members share my intense frustration that it has not happened. Until there is a breakthrough, we must keep doing all we can to relieve the suffering.
Well, with me in the studio is Hussam Zomlot, who's head of the Palestinian mission to the UK. Thanks very much indeed for coming in to talk to us. What's your reaction to this latest statement from the more than 20 countries regarding Gaza?
Strong words. We welcomed it officially.
we do need to see the unity and the consensus of the international community. We commend the UK government for leading the efforts to actually issue such a strong statement, but strongly worded statements, time is long past that. Time is long. We need action, and we need it now. Children are dying of hunger on the 21st century, live on TV. So we were expecting the declaration, the announcement of a series of serious actions that would actually stop this carnage.
So it's clear from the latest incidents with both the UN aid and Gaza Humanitarian Foundation aid distribution is not working properly. What would you like to see in place instead of that?
Please don't call it the Humanitarian Foundation. Please. Call it whatever you want, Lauren, okay? But it's not a humanitarian and it's not a foundation. These are death traps. Those people in charge are war criminals. There will be accountability, and you will soon be describing them as war criminals. I've seen that you have hosted the chairman of this death trap, this monstrous institution. This person particularly has to be behind bars very soon and be indicted with war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Well, I mean, at the moment, Israel would push back against that description of it. But this, just to bring me back to what you think needs to happen on the ground. I mean, at the moment, there are talks, aren't there, ongoing about a ceasefire. How imminent is that?
But I'm sorry to push back, Lorraine. Israel can push back whatever it wants. We need to discuss what the ICJ is saying, what the ICC is saying, what the UN is saying, what the whole world is saying, not what Israel
and so in
is
terms
justifying.
Of practicalities, where at the moment the UN is having trouble getting aid in, what do you want to see? You mentioned that you want action from these countries that have signed this. What action do you want?
Actually, the issue is not aid. There is enough aid. The issue is the blockade. Israel has been putting Gaza on complete, utter blockade. No food, no nothing coming in or out of Gaza. People have money. People will just want to go and buy their own food. Israel is using starvation as a method of war. This is deliberate. This is by design. And by the way, why are they invading Deir al-Balah? It's the last remaining small area of Gaza that still has some sort of a community, some sort of water still there. So this is complete and utter act of campaign of erasure, extermination and annihilation. They have destroyed all the agricultural land. They have destroyed all the livestock in Gaza. They are shooting and killing our fishermen if they dare go to fish. So they are depriving the people, the families, of any source of food. Why do you think is that? Why?
So the UN has managed to get some lorries of aid in just recently, but again, there was an issue with that, a security incident. When you talk to the UN, what are your conversations with them about what they can get in? Because the blockade has now stopped. There is some aid coming in, but not obviously as much as people would want.
We always talk to the UN, and the UN tell me and tell you and tell the world they're ready. The UN has been there for 77 years. The UN has the most extensive structures. The UN is absolutely transparent, and it has been delivering aid and food to the people that are in need in the most efficient way. It's Israel that prevents the UN from doing its business on purpose, because the UN would enable people to be fed and to breathe and to live. And this is exactly what Israel doesn't want. It wants to see a complete annihilation of the people of Gaza. It is not just, some incidents here and there. Can't the world see the pattern here?
Yeah. Israel has said that the statement from these different countries, the 24 countries, fails to focus the pressure on Hamas and fails to recognise Hamas's role and responsibility for the situation, and they put the blame again on Hamas. That's Israel's position. Just on the issue of the ceasefire, we know that the US wants to put pressure, has said that it wants to put pressure on Israel to come to a ceasefire. What are you hearing from the US as to whether that's actually making any difference and whether there's going to be a ceasefire anytime soon?
The Netanyahu is not interested. Netanyahu wants only to save himself at the expense of our people, at the expense of his own people, the region and the rest of the world. Netanyahu, every time the US and the other mediators, Qatar and Egypt, take one step, Netanyahu takes 10 steps backward. He changes the goalpost all the time, and therefore we don't have a ceasefire. And even if we have a ceasefire, we had 3 ceasefires before. proposed by the US and the rest of the mediators, and Netanyahu breached all the 3 ceasefires. We need to make sure that we have the sufficient pressure on Israel, and that's why the action that Israel will be brought into compliance and will be, the international will have to be enforced. What is happening in Gaza is not going to stay in Gaza, Lauren.
No.
It's not going to stay in Gaza. This is going to dent all of us, will taint all of us, will stain all of us. And the question is, who's next? So if we do not now enforce the international will, the consequences will be absolutely severe.
And this may be moving two steps away because we haven't got to a ceasefire yet. But given the weakening of Gaza and the weakening of the institutions within, the weakening of Hamas, I should say, and the weakening of the institutions within Gaza, what would you see as a functioning government for Gaza after a ceasefire? I'm
sorry, Lauren, there is no weakening of Hamas. There is weakening of our people and their structures and their hospitals and their schools and their universities. 90% of Gaza's hospitals, schools, universities, homes are gone. This has nothing to do with Hamas. Let's set that record very clear. But we have a plan. The plan is absolutely ready. It's presented to the world. We have the consensus of the Arab world, the consensus of the international community, including the UK government, in support of that plan, whereby Gaza will be governed by a legitimate Palestinian technocratic government. There is no political faction in it. That Gaza and the West Bank is one unity, that the unity of our people, political system, and there will be a massive reconstruction so people are enabled and able to stay on their home. But one last thing, this issue is about something we knew for 77 years, that Israel has no regard for Palestinian lives. But this is about time that we see the world and the rest of the international community, do they have regard to Palestinian lives and human lives in general, and are they capable to implement their own rules and their own values?
Hussam Zallat, thank you very much indeed for coming to talk to us. Thank you. Well, like other international media, the BBC is barred by Israel from reporting inside Gaza. Emir Nada sent this report from Jerusalem, and a warning: you may find some of the images distressing.
Fleeing by bus or by cart as the bombs grow louder. Deir al-Balah, a city of over 50,000, has escaped the worst of the ground fighting in Gaza. But now Palestinians report tanks rolling into its streets. The main emergency services agency says that it's receiving calls of families trapped under the rubble after shelling. One young man fleeing the area expressed the confusion of many.
This morning, I was surprised to find that there is bombing everywhere, and they dropped evacuation leaflets. Now, all of Khan Yunis is under evacuation, and there is basically no room in Al-Mawasi to accommodate the people from Khan Yunis. All of Rafah is under evacuation, and now you have decided that half of Deir al-Balah is under evacuation. Where will we move to?
As Israeli ground forces push into unprecedented new parts of Gaza, fleeing families report how closely the violence has come to their homes.
We saw the tanks in front of us, and there were so many snipers are shooting everywhere, and the shots entered the home. And while in front of me, while I was standing in front of the home, the shot in front of me entered the home. So I survived. It's a miracle to stay alive.
The operation has taken many by surprise, with suggestions the city had been spared previously because it's thought there are hostages held there. Now some Israelis say the military wants to maximize pressure as ceasefire negotiations continue.
The idea of preparing for a military operation in the center of Gaza, in the central camps in Gaza, like Deir al-Balah and others, is to hint to Hamas that there is no safe haven for them anywhere in Gaza.
The new operation is already causing alarm, dealing another devastating blow to the humanitarian situation, says the UN, as the spectre of starvation is growing rapidly. Baby Sila is one of many children being brought to medics in Gaza bearing signs of severe malnutrition.
The size of her head doesn't fit her body. We gave her nutritional supplement, but it's not enough for the condition she's in. She's 11 months old, but her development is only that of a 3-month baby.
Humanitarian agencies continue to call on Israel to let more aid in, but as its military operation grinds forward, in Gaza, civilians are finding only more daily horror. Emir Nada, BBC News, Jerusalem.
With me is our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet. So some upsetting pictures there in Emir Nada's report. To go back to this statement from the 20 countries, how significant is that at this point?
It's very strongly worded. It doesn't mince its words. It talks about how the suffering of Palestinians has reached new depths. It levels very strong criticism about this new aid system that Israel continues to defend, a system developed between Israel and the United States, and which says it is delivering millions of meals to Palestinians, but which the United Nations said is simply not at the scale or the kind of system, a death trap, as it's being regarded by many. So the statement takes aim at that as well. But not surprisingly, it was swiftly followed by a statement from Israel accusing these 26 countries of being on the side of Hamas, being disconnected from reality. And sadly, the political reality is that this statement, like others before it, not as strongly worded, not as many as part of the statement, will not be the kind of pressure on Israel which will push it in any way to change its posture.
And militarily, on the ground in Gaza, things are hotting up again, aren't they?
Yes, this has taken many by surprise. It's the 21st month of war. We've seen in the images, even though international journalists cannot go into Gaza, that Palestinian journalists and Palestinians on the ground, aid agencies, have been sending the images of vast destruction, unlivable areas in the north and in the south of Gaza, as you just heard from Hussam Zomlot, that the Deir al-Balah is one of the last relative refuges, that it has become a humanitarian hub for the aid agencies, that there is a water system there is a desalination plant, there are warehouses for food, even though it's not being distributed in the kind of way that the United Nations would like it to see distributed. Why is Israel going in now? It talks about expanding its military operations. Does it have certain Hamas military commanders and installations in its sites? Is it trying to basically destroy all the ability of Hamas to operate anywhere in the Gaza Strip? And of course, this has not only is it meant that the Israeli forces are going in on the ground and in the air, it means that there's been yet another evacuation order, and the UN says that pretty well nearly 90% of Gaza is under evacuation orders, which is forcing the Palestinians into smaller and smaller areas. And there are the right-wing members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's government who make it absolutely clear that their goal is to push Palestinians into a corner of the Gaza Strip to make life so unbearable that they will be forced to say enough is enough and we want to leave.
And at one stage it looked as though there was some momentum towards going back to talks and getting a ceasefire together. And where do you see that now? I mean, they have been talking, but there doesn't seem to be the momentum that there was. I'm
sure there's been so many times on this programme where you've covered a deal is close, it's 90% there, it's almost there, but we're going to sign it this week. It does seem now that there is a momentum. The reports from Israel is that Israel has accepted many of the conditions of this plan for a 60-day ceasefire, hostage release in exchange for Palestinians. There was a suggestion that Hamas was looking at it favourably and that they may be minded. It's not clear yet. And we hear that President Trump is also putting pressure on Israel, which quite frankly is the only pressure that for Prime Minister Netanyahu matters to him, especially when he's in a government which is being held up by those right-wing ministers who want the war to expand and don't want the war to stop. Is he moving toward July 27th is the day that the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, will go into summer recess. Then Prime Minister Netanyahu will not face the threat of bringing down his government. Some are saying that is what they're moving toward. That's, of course, about a week away, and that's a long time in Gaza, where every day, as you know, we're getting reports of people being killed, people being injured, people on the brink of starvation. Today, hearing reports that 19 more Palestinians have died of hunger.
On that side of things, you mentioned that Mr. Netanyahu is subject to his coalition, the pressure from within the government. What about any kind of pressure within Israel to stop the war and to get the hostages back and to end the suffering for the Palestinians?
The pressure is enormous. Today, the hostage families are in utter despair. Their agony and anger deepens again. It has been believed that, Amir Nader mentioned in his report, it was believed that one of the reasons why Israel hadn't gone into this central area of Gaza was because there were reports that they must have the intelligence that many of the Israeli hostages that are still alive, and even some of the remains, are being held in that area, so their lives will be put at risk. So you have the hostages' families doubling down on their opposition. You have the Israeli Army Chief of Staff making it clear today, although he supports the war, supports Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying he simply doesn't have enough reservists to keep fighting the war. You have former prime ministers, former spy chiefs coming out accusing Israel of war crimes, asking why this war is continuing. So there is a lot of pressure within Israeli society to end this war. And so far, Prime Minister Netanyahu continues to say that it's in Israel's interest to continue the war, to, in his words, destroy Hamas, even though many of his generals said a year ago that they had done all they could militarily. But he continues to say that there is still work to be done.
Lise Doucet, thank you very much indeed there for all that analysis. Thank you. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. One of Jeffrey Epstein's victims and a key witness in his associate Ghislaine Maxwell's sex trafficking trial is calling on President Trump to release information in the government's possession related to the sex offender and to prove everyone wrong if he has nothing to hide. Mr. Trump has faced a rare backlash to his leadership from some of his most loyal supporters and calls for more information to be released on Jeffrey Epstein. Ms. Farmer and her sister Maria made the earliest known reports of abuse by Epstein to the NYPD and the FBI in 1996. Our New York correspondent Neda Tawfik asked her what she thought of the debate surrounding the release of the so-called Epstein client list.
It's exhausting to have this, cycle happen over and over where the case gets so much attention and then it feels like often that's not really followed by much action. I was not surprised that Trump's team made this announcement. I have never felt that Trump was someone that would be very supportive of justice for Epstein's victims, just given that he's a sexual predator and that he had this close association with Epstein. But of course, when there are all these people saying that there will be more attention given and there will be more accountability, you still hope that that might be true. I think really the case has been politicized so much and it's hard not to feel used in that process.
What is your kind of key message right now to Donald Trump?
Prove everyone wrong. If you have nothing to hide, then please release this information that people are asking for. Please make sure that Ghislaine Maxwell stays behind bars where she deserves to be. If you are truly not implicated, then this should not be a problem to release more information about this case.
Have you lost hope that you'll ever get answers? What are some of the kind of key things you want to see?
I think most people involved realize that it's much more complex than a client list, right? That's not the kind of information that we are hoping for. I think there are some very central questions, though, that have still not been answered. And those are things such as, following the money. There's been investigations that have looked at the financial aspect of this, and there's so many questions there that lead me to believe there's been financial crimes that have not been investigated that may be implicating people in power that it's important for us to understand.
In response to this interview, the White House called the allegations old fake news and that President Trump had kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of his club for being a creep. Well, let's speak to our North America correspondent Neda Tawfik, who did that interview. So it seems that Ms Farmer is not satisfied with the response so far of the government on this.
Yeah, look, there is a real sense from Annie Farmer that the victims have been used here, that there are elements that have used the Epstein case to their advantage, that they've tried to sensationalize elements of it to benefit themselves, she says. But she says that doesn't discount the fact that there were real crimes committed and that real people were affected here. And what we heard from Annie Farmer, and, you know, I've been speaking to her ever since she testified in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, which led to a conviction. And there's a real sense that there have been some missteps by the government, not just Donald Trump's U-turn in saying originally that they would release everything related to Epstein to then essentially saying case closed, but she also points to the firing of one of the prosecutors who was on the Epstein case and the Maxwell case, Maureen Comey. And she said, speaking to other survivors, there is a real question at this exact time when the focus is on Epstein and his victims, why that was done. So a lot of concern from Annie Farmer and some of the other victims about whether they'll ever see more information released. They say it's important to prevent in the future any kind of missteps by the Department of Justice. So a real call for transparency, even as we are seeing in these last few weeks, the politics really overshadowing some of those calls by the victims.
And on that, I mean, this hasn't gone away, has it? So briefly, tell us why this has been such a big issue for the Trump administration.
It really is so interesting because you have some claiming that this is kind of the biggest threat to Donald Trump's presidency so far. Remember...
Do stay with us here on BBC News. We're back shortly. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. Hello, I'm Lauren Taylor. This is The Context on BBC News. Mixing profit with pollution. The water industry regulator for England and Wales is to be scrapped and replaced after failing to hold utility companies to account. First, though, to Syria, where a level of calm has returned to the city of Suwaida following a week of brutal tribal clashes between Druze fighters and Bedouin gunmen. There are government forces in place around the city to restore order, but it is a fragile peace. More than 1,000 people were killed in the fighting in recent weeks, with bitter recriminations on all sides. The Israelis have agreed to withhold their response while the interim government attempts to restore some order. But the Bedouin tribes are threatening to resume their offensive unless the hostages and their injured are returned. Joining me now is James Jeffrey, former Special Representative for Syrian Engagement and the Special Envoy to the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS under the previous Trump administration. Thanks very much indeed for being with us on the programme. So at the moment, an uneasy calm. How do you see that playing out? Is there a risk of this returning to violence?
Well, first, thanks for having me on. There is a tremendous risk of this particular situation returning to violence. There's also a chance it won't. Remember, 3 months ago, we had the terrible fighting in Latakia between Alawites, Sunni militias, and government intervention, often against the Alawites. That situation has been calm since then. The al-Shara government is trying hard to do the right thing, which is why the U.S. continues to support it. The problem is it is a has weak instruments to execute it, namely its own military forces, who are composed themselves of militias, some of them with terrorist or extremist backgrounds.
Well, the Trump administration were early backers of the new government in Syria, weren't they? And we've just heard in a White House briefing that President Trump was caught off guard by the Syria bombing that happened, the Israeli bombing. What kind of levers do the US have to try and stabilise the situation there?
Well, most importantly, the U.S. Was not as early as the Europeans, the Arab states, or Turkey. It took Trump months to come on board. You remember the trip to Saudi Arabia where he met with al-Shara. But once on board, the U.S. has played a dramatically active role in supporting the central government because, as our envoy for Syria, Tom Barrack, says correctly, we don't have a plan B. It's either to build up a central government supported by the international community, work out these problems with minorities, stem the violence, or else Syria will descend into the horror we saw for 14 years up until the end of last year. So that's the administration position. It's a smart position, but there's no guarantee that everybody will adhere to it. The Israelis did surprise Trump. They had good reasons to support the Druze, who are also a minority in Israel and much appreciated by other Israelis for their military service. But the extent of the Israeli bombing, particularly in Damascus, did come as a shock to everybody, and I think it was a big mistake.
And Israel and Syria at the moment are on a ceasefire. Do you expect that particular ceasefire to hold?
I think that, first of all, Israel had shifted its position from absolute rejection of al-Shara to, under pressure of circumstances, al-Shara's good posture during the bombing of Iran and American pressure, to a position more accommodating of the Syrian government. In fact, they were talking in Baku in the weeks preceding the Suwaida incident. So I think the Israelis will get back to...
Apologies, we seem to have lost our line there to James Jeffrey. Apologise for that, and thank you to James Jeffrey, who can still hear us, for appearing on the show. Apologies. Well, we're going to take you now to... Let's take you to a situation in Ecuador where the most powerful drug lord has pleaded not guilty to 7 charges of drugs and weapons trafficking in a court in the United States. Adolfo Macias, who's also known as Fito, appeared a day after being extradited. He was the leader of the Los Choneros gang, which has alleged links to a powerful Mexican drugs cartel and European criminal gangs. For more on this, let's speak to our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Ione Wells. Bring us up to speed with this case and why it's so significant.
Well, this is really significant because VMR, known as Fito, is one of the most powerful drug gang leaders in Ecuador. He escaped from prison in early 2024. That triggered a wave of fresh violence in Ecuador, including prison riots, some gang attacks, kidnappings as well, which led the president to declare a state of emergency. Now, he was recaptured last month, and he is now the first Ecuadorian to be extradited under new measures that were passed in a referendum last year after the president wanted to toughen up his so-called war on gangs. He has been extradited to the US to face criminal proceedings there. He's facing multiple different charges, which include charges related to cocaine trafficking, but also arms trafficking from the US to Ecuador. He could potentially face, if found guilty, at least 20 years in prison, potentially even a life sentence. He has so far pleaded, though, not guilty through his lawyer and an interpreter in this federal court in New York.
And what do we expect to come out during this case? I mean, how much detail will we get about those kind of operations?
Well, he is being accused of widespread trafficking, both of drugs, but also of arms as well. The US attorney